So we all know that there was a before the dome, right? And the dome was created by the gods, the dome that covers the earth. So before the dome, creation, which is even in the biblical text now when we read Genesis, we now understand what it means. But before the dome, there was no water and there was no carbon on earth prior to the arrival of the gods. Which, of course, many people are not going to like me saying gods in plural, but that's a different story. Now, when the gods arrived, which I don't even know where, I mean, it's too much for me because there's not enough information. But there was no water nor any carbon in the atmosphere or on the ground. Therefore, there was no dome because these two elements, water and carbon, dissolve and degenerate the silicon life form. As you know, the silicon life form was not just the trees, but also plants and animals and humans, as in like human life forms, but in the form of silicon. So they're not compatible with each other because silicon dissolves in the water and degenerates because of carbon. So for silicon mining and purification purposes, as well as for the upcoming human creation, so the creation of humanity came afterwards, the scientists of the gods created these two elements artificially. Even in the biblical text, when you read, it says, like, in a way, it makes you understand that carbon and water were created. So there was just silicon life without any carbon. We are, it's amazing because we all know now, it's pure science, that our bodies are carbon and water. It's common knowledge and it's common sense. But like the previous life forms were silicon. They did not need water or carbon. And that blows me away. And now I pretty much understand the mythological texts and the biblical texts. So, the gods, having created the basic elements for carbon-based life form, which is also like, because we would not be able to live in a silicon life environment because that would erode our life. So we're not compatible. We can use silicon, but silicon does damage to our life, to our carbon water bodies. So, where was I? So once the gods created the basic elements for carbon-based life form, with their scientific knowledge and the know-how of creation, they used the formula and the characteristics of how humans should look and think and behave. That's why it's written, let's create human in our image. But of course we are inferior because we are made of clay, right? So carbon. And then of course with the whole thing about all the genetic experiment. And we are actually an intellectual property of human genetic makeup because we have their genes, but we are inferior and we are a creation. Therefore we are an intellectual property. We are a property of the gods because we were created by the gods. Elohim, right? So it's, of course, I'm just stating the facts and I'm stating the obvious, but I know that the reality of the real world doesn't fall good for people. We have intellect, vision capacity, hearing aptitude, language cognition, consciousness awareness aptitude, soul attachment, and everything else which makes human different from animals. And this is all a package. This was packaged exclusively together into this life form. That's why we as a human entity are an intellectual property, a registered trademark of the gods. We are their property. The DNA is their property. And the difference, the number one aspect which makes us humans different from animals, by humans I mean us water, carbon life form humans, is that humans have soul. With the exception of clones, it seems that clones don't have soul, and animals don't have a soul. So that's the reason why there's such a huge difference between humans and animals, because humans have soul, animals do not have. I think even the biblical texts, if you read the original texts in the ancient language, the word ruach is only available for humans. Animals don't have ruach, which again, ruach is then translated badly as in like everything is breathing, but then ruach has a special translation which is not just to breathe, but it's actually what makes humans different from animals. Now, this is like kind of like the whole thing about the ether, right? Because the ether is here. But I still don't understand if the ether was here before the dome was created or if the ether is present after the dome was created. I guess the ether is present after the dome was created because everything is electromagnetic and it's because of the dome, which functions thanks to the silicon. So what if like the silicon is actually the raw life form before you have engineering by intelligent life beings which are superior? It blows me away. And also then we understand this whole thing about the connection between our minds and our life with the ether, which is what people call in their own way the astral realm. There's no astral, it's just the connection between our life form and the ether. I mean, you can call it astral whatever you want. So it's the interconnection between that. And this was, as far as I can understand, the actual referencing of all this is coded as a description written in runes. You know the runes when we play video games or we watch fantasy movies and stuff, and they say the runes. Yeah, the runes. The what we understand as runes is the language of the gods, where they have all these. Even like in the video games, like in the movies, when you get to these mythical places with runes, and we don't understand how to read runes because it's the language of the gods. So everything has an origin when we speak about. Why we have this in popular culture and movies and literature and video games and etc. So of course we all know now that history is fake. Lots of years have been added, so it's very hard to grasp how many years were added. And when there seems to be this falsified entire history, which was I'm not going to say names because then people go crazy, but as far as I can understand from this knowledge, 1,700 years were added to the timeline. And there's one specific character which is very important, it seems, Alexander the Great. Like lots of things go around Alexander the Great, which was then taken out of context in many ways. All of the history books that exist now today in the education system and in the official system were written in the 19th century. Which was not actually the 19th, it was like the J or I 9, so it was like the 9th century of Jesus Christ because of the J or the I. So, but everything was written in the 19th century, and everything we have comes from less than 150 years ago. So, there's not a single original document, manuscript, or book in public existence today that is older than 200 years. And like 200 years is like the most. So, everything we have is from this period, and it was added. They added like 1700, so 1,700 years of non-existing years. They were added to the timeline. As far as I understand, it seems that Alexander the Great was born in July year 1356 Anno Domini. But I'm not sure if that's the case. So. In the 14th century, and then the 15th century, which is the 1400s, marks the end of the millennium, according to what I was able to understand until this moment. That's why the whole thing about rediscovering America, and they get to America and they see all these ancient buildings abandoned and stuff. So it seems that it's been 5 centuries since the end of the millennium, or even more than that, and just 100 years before the 1400s, if Alexander the Great was born, and then we have this history from the 1300s all the way to the 1800s, which are like 500 years of pure misinterpreted history. It seems like the people who rule the world today, they only have about 300 years since they're ruling. So from the end of the 1700s, even 1700 and so. And I can speak a bit more about this timeline. It's gonna be difficult because all these years added and stuff. But at least now we know a bit more. We know about the Middle Ages, which were invented from the 5th to the 15th century. We know about the 15th century, which is the 1400s, with the discovery of America, and that's when they started with this whole globe Earth thing. And then there's this history between 1500 and 1800, which we actually have no clue what happened. Lots of years added there, lots of things, as in like humanity was primitive. And then all of a sudden in the 1800s, we have these events in the world and a huge amount of children, and all of a sudden people lots of people out of nowhere, and like we start this banking system, and then we know that the cities that we have are made above the old cities. So yeah, we are totally lost. But I'm gonna try this timeline to see how the reaction of the people. But yeah, that's a fact that there was a time before the creation of the dome, and the life form was silicon. And we've seen my videos with these mountains, mesa, which are not mountains. They were trees, and they were cut. And now we have the corpses of the silicon trees and the what's left of them. You see the basalt columns, hexagon columns. It's just fascinating, and that's why. And we are not compatible with silicon life form because we are carbon water form. Impressive.